So welcome, Shane, to the Climate Couch. You are the first Green Councillor to join us on the couch. So there we are, a world first, which is what we like to do in Frome, I'm sure, as part of that.
Yeah.
So you're joining us, hopefully. One, you'll give us a little bit of an introduction and also tell us a little bit more around climate crisis and some of your key messages as part of your briefing or campaign.
Yep.
So over to you.
Happily, yep. Well, I'm Councillor Shane Collins. I'm currently a Mendip District Councillor since 2015 and due to be abolished on April Fool's Day this year. And then I got elected as a Somerset County Councillor last May, so I'm in for a 5-year term there. And I've been a Green activist since 1989 when I joined the Green Party and got involved in community arts centres in Brixton in South London and Twyford Down and road protests, and been doing drugs campaigning in London and green campaigning, putting on events, and I'm currently a director of the Green Gathering Festival, which is the greenest festival in the land. We keep winning the greenest award. So yeah, I'm a committed green worried activist, green warrior, one of those. And so this is a talk that I've sort of developed really. I suppose it started off actually speaking at Extinction Rebellion in London, and somebody asked me, well, what can we actually do now? It's all very well telling the government what to do, but what can we do now? So I thought I'd try and incorporate that. I mean, the first thing to say is that what we as individuals do is not going to be enough. You know, the green movement since the 1980s have been asking people to make individual changes for the common good. And we've failed. We haven't made those changes quick enough. We live in a world polluted by 24/7 advertising, and so people are constantly being exhorted to consume, buy, work, die, and obviously our message is contrary to that. Yeah. So, you know, I'm going to look at the problems we have at the moment, things we can do on an individual basis, but really looking at different strategies of how to convince the government and big business to make changes, because that's where the change has got to come in the timescale we've got left. You know, just looking at the timescale, well, okay, let's look at the three problems with the current system we've got. We live in a world of finite resources, so it means that we cannot just keep growing and growing and growing the economy in a world of finite resources. You know, the only things that keep growing and growing in nature are cancers, and it doesn't end well. Same with yeast in alcohol, it doesn't end well. So as well as the finite resources, the fact of taking natural resources and turning them into a product has all sorts of polluting side effects. I could go into them in some detail, but let's mainly just look at climate change. Yep. That's the thing that is going to affect us all. There's obviously pesticide use, but climate change. Now let's just look at a long-term weather forecast. Okay, here we are, 2023, temperature rise is about 1.2, 1.29, depending upon where you have your starting point. It's very likely that by 2030 we will have hit 1.5 degrees centigrade. It seems likely that round about the mid-2030s the summer Arctic ice sheet will disappear. Right. So the albedo effect, the bouncing of the sun's rays off light white ice sheets, will disappear, and it will be a dark ocean that will be absorbing the sun's light, sunshine. So we can expect bad things to happen then as the Arctic continues to rise. It's already, parts of the Arctic are around 4 degrees hotter now. Obviously that 1.2 degrees centigrade rise is an average, and it heats quicker on land than it does on seas. Yeah. By 2050, we're looking at large areas in East Asia, southern China, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, parts of Bangladesh, Indonesia. With sea level rise, the low-lying paddy fields will get inundated with salt water, and once land has got salt water on it, bang goes the rice crop. You're suddenly looking at mangroves and a different style of agriculture. So we can expect by 2050 that rice will probably cease to be an internationally tradable product. Anybody who can grow it will keep them for their own population. And Sir David King estimated, the ex-government scientist estimates, about 200 or 300 million people will have to move because their land will be unarable by 2050. Looking ahead to 2070, some work by Professor Tim Lenton from Exeter University and colleagues suggesting that the sort of middle latitudes around North Africa, the Middle East, India, southern parts of the United States will have too many days over 40 degrees centigrade for crops to continue growing.
Oh, okay.
So that's another 1.3 billion people who live on those latitudes whose land will become unarable. They will have to move. So 2 degrees centigrade rise could be sort of 20, 30 years, sort of 2040, 2050. So we can't get to that situation. You know, we know that is going to cause huge, huge problems. When resources get short, what tends to happen is it either cooperation or competition, and the competition is obviously men with guns guarding what remaining supplies there are and fighting over it. Calamitous situation, which is already happening in some parts of the world now. You know, the climate crisis has hit many parts of the world now. But because it hasn't happened down our street, we are completely unaware of it, and we're not hardwired as humans for long-term problems. We're hardwired to a lion coming round the corner.
Short-term
crises, yeah. And the other problem with the system at the moment is inequality. You know, we have as much inequality now as at the time of the pharaohs. You know, the rich 1% are getting more and more wealthy, and the bottom 30% are getting comparatively more and more poor. So for those three reasons, finite resources, pollution and inequality, I think we all agreed the system has to change. How can we do that? So these are a few things that we as individuals can do in our lives now.
Yep.
I'm not claiming that those are going to make the difference quick enough. You know, if we take David King, the Chief Scientific Advisor's words from 2 years ago now, saying what we do in the next 3 to 4 years will likely determine the future of humanity. Okay, we're looking at tipping points like the Arctic ice sheet and various other tipping points being passed. So we've got to make changes quick, but as individuals, it's not going to be enough. We need government to change the regulations. But to have a quick look at things we can do individually. So food, again, a fairly obvious choice between corporate food from supermarkets, everything covered in plastic, long food miles coming from the other side of the world, versus, you know, local shops, locally grown foods, veg box, organic veg boxes, no plastic at all. There's a very clear choice in the environmental effect of how you choose to buy your food. If you grow your own food, you're saving money, very little CO2 emissions. Housing. You know, we need to encourage people to insulate the 29 million houses in the country, of which probably 3 or 4 million are reasonably insulated. But any new housing, we have to change the planning regulations so that they're as close to net zero as possible, or passive house. They come with solar panels as standard, with heat pumps as standard, batteries as standard, you know, all the common sense stuff. But we're still in a situation where housing developers who provide about 20% of the donations for the Conservative Party can get away with very, very poor regulations, and compared to the rest of Europe they are truly appalling. But you know, we do have choices as individuals. We can spend that money on insulating our houses, on putting solar panels on the roofs, these sort of things. Energy is a key thing. You know, every society to be successful has to have a cheap form of energy. You know, in the past it was muscle power, then slave power, then wood, charcoal, coal, and then fossil fuels. So how we as individuals decide where to buy our energy from is really basic. You know, we can support the fossil fuel industry or we can support the renewables industry. With renewables, once you've made the initial outlay for installation for say 3 kilowatts of solar panels, about £6,000, the marginal cost, the running costs are virtually nothing. You know, so you'll make your money back within 8 years. After that, you're just making an income.
Yeah.
And it's really important, because if you have centralised energy, you have centralised economics. You know, if we're all paying 300 quid a month to the big 6 energy companies, those companies are going to get very, very economically powerful, and then they can throw their weight around politically. So if you have centralised power generation, you have centralised economics, and you have centralised politics. All right, if as Greens we want decentralised energy, we want anybody with a south-facing roof to be able to produce their own energy. We want every school, public building, factory building to be producing their own energy. And then the energy is decentralised, so the economics are decentralised. We're not all paying 6 energy companies 300 quid a month. We're keeping that money ourselves. Then you start to get decentralised economics and therefore decentralised politics. So just how you get your daily electricity is a really key thing on a big way. Similarly with transport, you know, do we go for an electric car, a fossil fuel car, a bicycle, or an electric bicycle, or walking, or public transport? Really simple, basic choices. And the most damaging form of transport, obviously air travel, that should be rationed. Internal, inland, national flights where you can do it by train should be banned. We really have to get a little bit more prescriptive about this. Similarly with money, you know, in a world where people are divorced from the land, you know, the commons are being privatised, we can't grow our own food, we need money. What do you do with it? Do you then put your money into a bank that will invest in fossil fuels, or do you put your money in a local credit union or Triodos Bank or Nationwide Building Society, you know, banks that are not funding fossil fuels? It's really key. And lastly, media. We talked before about the fact that a few offshore billionaires own the majority of media in Britain. We don't want to be listening to them. Their solutions are not our solutions. We have a few media organisations in the country that are not owned by corporations. You know, the BBC, Guardian's owned by the Scott Trust, Financial Times owned by Nikkei, Channel 4, Byline News, you know, a few good smaller ones. But the vast majority of the print media is owned by nasty offshore-based billionaires who are not out for the same thing as we are. So it's really important that we support small-scale media, and even if that means paying a small subscription so you don't get inundated with commercial adverts, I'd say that's well worth doing. So let's move on to how to change things, strategies for change. So we're often told if we want to change things, oh, write a letter to your MP, vote at the election, which is not enough. Those are the solutions generally put there by political parties because they want people to just, stay down there. You can have a vote once every 4 years. You don't need to concern yourself with anything else. Let's look at how successfully we can make change. So, consumer choice, consumer boycotts, really basic stuff. If you didn't like apartheid, you didn't buy oranges from South Africa, you didn't buy South African made goods. Consumer choice links to food and energy and transport here is if you think of your daily money as like your daily vote, and who are you going to give that vote to? You're going to give it to the fossil fuel energy companies or the renewable energy companies? Are you going to give it to an organic food supplier or the plastic covered supermarket with long food miles? So, consumer choice is a really basic, simple thing that everybody can do. It's obviously much harder to make everybody aware of the choices because we're operating in the mainstream media that doesn't want to encourage people to make those changes. But that is something that all of us can do. Similarly, campaign groups, local campaign groups, whether it's Green Party, XR, Friends of the Earth, local rambling group, whatever it is, it builds social capital. It makes people feel like they're part of a network. Yep. Because there's no doubt the poo is going to hit the fan in the next few decades, and if we're all a bunch of individual atomized consumers, we're not going to be able to cope with the problems coming along the line nearly so well as if we're in networks of people. If we know a lot of people and we're involved with them, different campaigning groups, again, anybody can do it. The third way of changing is the traditional way through elections. You can, I think you have to really now only vote for candidates who understand the climate crisis and are prepared to act on it and are not involved with political parties who will override individuals, MPs or councillors' wishes. Yeah. I'm a Green Party councillor. I would definitely recommend people to vote Green. That's not to say that some people in the Lib Dem and a few people in Labour don't understand the climate crisis. Vote for them if you think they're going to get in. But it's key that at the moment, politically, things go in a different direction. So the fourth way to cause social change is through protest. A to B protests, demonstrations, strikes. I should have actually added here campaign groups, unions, also another key way of networking with other people. And of course unions at the moment getting much more popular and starting to throw their weight around with lots of strikes going on. And we definitely still support key workers. It's not just during the pandemic, it's after as well. Nurses, teachers, posties, rail and ambulance workers, they need to be paid properly, and we need the government to pay them properly, and that means taxing people who are getting away with daylight robbery. But protest, A to B marches, it's a good way of showing the government or a corporation where public feeling is on a subject. But there's no doubt that an A to B march, people all going home, companies and governments can take that. They need people coming back again and again, or not leaving in the first place. And looking further on at the sort of 3.5% rule of civil resistance, that's the idea that 3.5% rule taken up by an academic called Erica Chenoweth from MIT, looking at all revolutions since the Second World War and how were some revolutions successful and why some revolutions failed. And what they concurred was that revolutions that could get 3.5% of the population peacefully in the main city, capital city square, whether it's Tahrir Square in Egypt, wherever it is, just get people in the main city square and get them to stay there. not to move, to aim to embarrass the government. Quite often the government will overreact with police and army, and then get the sympathy of the other 20–30% of the population who were in agreement but were just busy at the time or doing other stuff. It doesn't always work, and the Arab Spring in some places it went well and then has gone back the other way. But there's no doubt that it's worked in many places. Next, looking at the sort of property damage, or probably more properly put, the radical flank effect, put about by authors like Andreas Malm, the Swedish academic and activist, and he's arguing that the radical flank, so basically if you have a radical flank, a new organisation that's a radical group, it makes the old organisation that was before seen as radical seem more moderate, because there is a new radical group. Green Party used to be regarded as a radical, and then Extinction Rebellion came along and made the Green Party seem a bit more moderate. Just Stop Oil came along and made XR seem a little bit more moderate. And Andreas Malm argues that the radical flank effect has always had a degree of property damage involved in it, to make the government think, oh, those nasty extremists, those are the sort of rioters, the Malcolm X supporters, they look pretty scary, we better go with the Martin Luther Kings, the moderates. The suffragettes was obviously the same. You had some suffragettes who were going around smashing every window in Whitehall, setting alight government ministers' houses when they weren't there, jumping in front of racehorses, going on hunger strike, getting force-fed. They were very, very radical in a way that gets airbrushed out of history now, because we like to say it's all down to non-violent direct action, peaceful protest, but when you drill down into social change, South Africa being another one, the battle against apartheid, the ANC's original tactics were peaceful protest, but the Sharpeville massacre in '62, they realised, well, if we're going for peaceful protests and the security forces are just shooting us, it's not very responsible to ask people to put themselves in that situation. So the ANC changed their tactics. They brought in Umkhonto we Sizwe, the armed side of the ANC. Mandela realised pretty quickly that they didn't want to be involved in a guerrilla warfare because they didn't have the weapons, the military were very trained in that. So they went for acts of sabotage, unaccountable acts of sabotage, targeting infrastructure, power infrastructure in particular, and that really gave a boost to the energy and of the population, because they could see that things were happening in the background. And that sort of property damage, allied with boycotts of South African produce, many campaign groups and protests, eventually led to the end of apartheid. Other ways of changing, warfare. This is how governments cause political change. We live in Britain. Our government has gone to war in Libya. We've bombed Syria. We've been in Iraq twice. This is how governments cause social change. But it's not something we want to be any way involved in. I think violence against the person absolutely has no part to play in what we as Greens are suggesting as successful strategies. But it would be foolish to ignore the fact that some damage to property, whether it's accountable damage to property or unaccountable damage to property, has in the past played a big role in the sort of radical flank theory of getting governments and corporations to make social changes. So, I think we are inevitably facing changes as a result of climate change and the inequality,
Yeah.
we are inevitably facing huge changes. But what is not inevitable is the direction of change. You know, good things could still happen. I think we all realise that cooperation is better than competition, especially at a local level. You know, we work very well with campaign groups with different political shades on a local level. It's just on a national level it tends to get very, very competitive. But you know, the direction of change is not level, is not decided. And I just want to finish on, you know, a fairly sort of mea culpa, guilty point of view. You know, I've been involved, as I said, I think since 1989. I got involved with the Green Party. Many people did then, and ultimately we failed. You know, we are leaving the next generation an appalling prospect, and I feel quite guilty about that one didn't do more 30 years ago, 20 years ago, when we really could have made a difference. And so, you know, I'm constantly telling myself and asking your viewers, you know, how do you want to be feeling in 10 years' time? Because we still have a chance to make these massive changes. It's an ever decreasing chance, but I just don't want other people and myself to feel like in 10 years' time that now we didn't do all we could when we have a chance, because we still do have a chance. It may look pretty shit, but we can at least make it less shit and give, you know, a vast amount of the world's population a survivable chance. But where we're going at the moment, you know, we are looking at shedding billions of the world's populations as increasing parts of the world become unarable. So we've got a nasty choice ahead. And when you see the choices clearly, it's obvious. But part of what we're involved in this country is to obfuscate that choice. So, you know, we talk about carbon offsetting, we talk about net zero. In the Middle Ages, they talked about medieval indulgences. If you did something wrong, you'd report yourself to the vicar and he'd say, walk round the church backwards 5 times and give us a bit of money and you're absolved of your sins. It's exactly the same now with carbon offsetting and net zero. They are schemes to allow big corporations to carry on emitting, and we might plant a few trees or not cut down a few trees as a result. It's a rabbit out the hat. It's not going to get us to bring climate change back under control. I think that's about it. I think I've rushed through the problems of the world, things we can do on an individual level, but more importantly, things we can do on a national level to get business and government to make the changes we need in the timescale we've got left.
So if people are interested to find out more, where would they go? How would they contact you? Is this linked to the Green Party, or is this from a what's the best way?
You know, this is probably the Green Party manifesto, common sense writ large. I'm available. A quick Google search will find my council email or personal email, and you know, April the 21st, Extinction Rebellion in London. XR have decided not to block roads for the next few months in response to lots of people's frustration. Why are you targeting the individual? You should be targeting the government. So they are off the streets until September the 21st. The idea is to get 50, 100,000 people in Parliament Square and get them staying there for a few days until the government comes to its senses and actually enacts policies around the climate crisis. Because at the moment they are going the opposite way. They're just allowed licenses for, I think it was 140 licenses in the North Sea. I mean, Greens, Just Stop Oil, the International Energy Association, all the IPC scientists are quite clear. We cannot have new oil exploration with any chance of keeping below 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees centigrade. We've got 7 or 8 years of energy left in the North Sea. Let's use that as a time to make a huge shift towards renewables and cheap energy that's decentralised and won't cost people nearly so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. See, you finished your cup of tea. I didn't finish my cup of tea. But thank you for your time. So again,
pleasure, James. Pleasure, mate.
Please visit Shane, look him up, and continue the dialogue further if you'd like to pursue it. Thank you very much.
And if you go to festivals, I'm part of the programme team for the Glastonbury Speakers Forum and the Green Gathering Speakers Forum. Glastonbury, you probably won't get a ticket if you haven't got one, but Green Gathering you will. We had 380 talks, workshops, speakers going on over the 4 days of the Green Gathering. You know, it changes people's lives. It's changed mine. It can change yours. But you know, just remember, there's a lot of people out there feeling the same way. They may not have the venue or the time to talk about it, but it's really important that we do talk about it, and we do have the venues to talk about it, and bloody change it quick.
As you say, to make it vocal, but also visual with our climate film festival here in Frome as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So great. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. All right, thank you.